Alrighty. Welcome back to Wordy Wednesdays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth, and today we're going to be reading, sight reading, our without the very first time I've read any of these, from this short story collection I got a while back, called Voices from the Radium Age, and it's got a selection of short stories collected from the early 1900s, featuring such names as Jack London, Arthur Conan Doyle, E.M. Forster, Neil R. Jones, W.E.B. Du Bois, William Hope Hodgson, and Rokeya Sakawat Hossein. Let's see. Do I want to do the introductions here? One of them has a lot of spoilers, so I'm not going to do that one. There are two introductions. There's a series forward, and there's an introduction. I'll do the series forward, and then I'll do like the first two or so short stories, because that'll be... Yeah, because the third one's kind of beefy. I might do the fourth one. So tentatively, I'll be doing Sultana's Dream and The Voice in the Night. I may also go ahead and do The Horror of the Heights. So unless you people are probably better read than I am, you... I just lost track of my sentence. If you people are better read than I am, maybe you've heard of some of these. I have not. Possibly the red one by Jack London I might have heard of, because it's Jack London. So without further ado, let me just get a second bookmark in here so that I've got a gammon. Oh, that's... Let's skip right past it. Because I pay attention. We'll get that for now. Okay, so we'll do the series forward, and then go straight to Sultana's Dream. And yeah, so because these are from when they're from, that is respectively... Come on. Oh, don't skip. I'm having a hard time. These pages, they're so new. 1905, 1907, and 1913, respectively. If we get to the third one. Then some of the matter contained therein could be a tad antiquated, retrograde, whatever term you want to use, less modern than we'd like, or maybe accustomed to, so bear in mind their age. And hello, Frank Misers, thanks for tuning in. So I guess, yeah, I'll get started with the series forward and then get cracking. In this short story collection I've had sitting on my wall for, actually, this one might have been there for the better part of a year. They've got a second one out as well, entitled More Voices from the Radium Age. If memory serves, these were put together by MIT, or at least someone from MIT. Yes, the MIT Press from Cambridge. Cambridge, Mass. So I will get cracking on this presently. Voices from the Radium Age, edited and introduced by Joshua Glenn. Series Foreword by Joshua Glenn. Do we really know science fiction? There were the scientific romance years that stretched from the mid-19th century to circa 1900, and there was the genre's so-called golden age from circa 1935 through the early 1960s. But between those periods, overshadowed by them, was an era that has bequeathed us such tropes as the robot, berserk or benevolent, the tyrannical Superman, the dystopia, the unfathomable extraterrestrial, the sinister telepath, and the eco-catastrophe. A dozen years ago, writing for the SF blog io9.com at the invitation of Anna Lee Newitz and Charlie Jane Anders, I became fascinated with the period during which the sci-fi genre as we know it emerged. Inspired by the exactly contemporaneous career of Marie Curie, who shared a Nobel Prize for her discovery of radium in 1903, only to die of radiation-induced leukemia in 1934, I eventually dubbed this three-decade interregnum the Radium Age. Curie's development of the theory of radioactivity, which led to the extraordinary, terrifying, and awe-inspiring insight that the atom is, at least in part, a state of energy constantly in movement, is an apt metaphor for the 20th century's first 3 decades. These years were marked by rising socio-cultural strife across various fronts, the founding of the women's suffrage movement, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, socialist currents within the labor movement, anti-colonial and revolutionary upheaval around the world, as well as the associated strengthening of reactionary movements that supported, for example, racial segregation, immigration restriction, eugenics, and sexist policies. Science, as a system of knowledge, a mode of experimenting, and a method of reasoning, accelerated the pace of change during these years in ways simultaneously liberating and terrifying. As SF author and historian Brian Stableford points out in his 1989 essay, The Plausibility of the Impossible, the universe we discovered by means of the scientific method in the early 20th century defies common sense. We are haunted by a sense of the impossibility of ultimately making sense of things. By playing host to certain far-out notions, time travel, faster-than-light travel, and ESP, for example, that we have every reason to judge impossible, science fiction serves as an instrument of negotiation, Stableford suggests, with which we strive to accomplish the difficult diplomacy of existence in a scientifically knowable but essentially unimaginable world. This is no less true today than during the Radium Age. The social, cultural, political, and technological upheavals of the 1900 to 1935 period are reflected in the proto-SF writings of authors such as Olaf Stapledon, William Hope Hodgson, Muriel Jaeger, Carol Chapek, G.K. Chesterton, Cicely Hamilton, W.E.B. Du Bois, Yevgeny Zamyatin, E.V. Odell, Arthur Conan Doyle, Mikhail Bulgakov, Pauline Hopkins, Stanislav Ignacy Wittewitz, Aldous Huxley, Gustave Le Rouge, A. Merritt, Rudyard Kipling, Rose Macaulay, J.D. Beresford, J.J. Conington, S. Fowler Wright, Jack London, Thea von Harbaugh, and Edgar Rice Burroughs, not to mention the late period but still incredibly prolific H.G. Wells himself. More cynical than its Victorian precursor, yet less hard-boiled than the SF that followed, in the writings of these visionaries we find acerbic social commentary, shock tactics, and also a sense of frustrated idealism, and reactionary cynicism, too, regarding humankind's trajectory.
The MIT Press's Radium Age series represents a much-needed evolution of my own efforts to champion the best proto-SF novels and stories from 1900 to 1935 among scholars already engaged in the fields of utopian and speculative fiction studies, as well as general readers interested in science, technology, history, and thrills and chills. By reissuing literary productions from a time period that hasn't received sufficient attention for its contribution to the emergence of science fiction as a recognizable form, one that exists and has meaning in relation to its own traditions and innovations, as well as within a broader ecosystem of literary genres, each of which, as John Ryder? Rieder? Ryder notes in Science Fiction and the Mass Cultural Genre System of 2017, is itself a product of overlapping communities of practice. We hope not only to draw attention to key overlooked works, but perhaps also to influence the way scholars and SF fans alike think about this crucial yet neglected and misunderstood moment in the emergence of the SF genre. John W. Campbell and other Cold War era SF editors and propagandists dubbed a select group of writers and story types from the pulp era to be the golden age of science fiction. In doing so, they helped fix in the popular imagination a too narrow understanding of what the SF genre can offer. In his introduction to the 1974 collection Before the Golden Age, for example, Isaac Asimov notes that although it may have possessed a certain exuberance, in general, science fiction from before the mid 1930s moment when Campbell assumed editorship of Astounding Stories seems to anyone who has experienced the Campbell Revolution to be clumsy, primitive, naive. By returning to an international tradition of scientific speculation via fiction from after the Poe, Verne, Wells era and before SF's Golden Age, the Radium Age series will demonstrate, contra Asimov et al., the breadth, richness, and diversity of the literary works that were responding to a vertiginous historical period, and how they helped innovate a nascent genre, which wouldn't be named until the mid-1920s by Hugo Gernsback, founder of Amazing Stories and namesake of the Hugo Awards, as a mode of speculative imagining. The MIT Press's Noah J. Springer and I are grateful to the SF writers and scholars who have agreed to serve as this series' advisory board. Aided by their guidance, we'll endeavor to surface a rich variety of texts, along with introductions by a diverse group of SF scholars, SF writers, and others that will situate these remarkable, entertaining, forgotten works within their own social, political, and scientific contexts, while drawing out contemporary parallels. We hope that reading Radium Age writings, published in times as volatile as our own, will serve to remind us that our own era's seemingly natural, eternal, and inevitable social, economic, and cultural forms and norms are, like Madame Curie's atom, forever in flux. And we're going to skip the introduction because it is about twice as long and it spoils the stories. So we're not going to go through that. I just finished the Forever War. That was a pretty good read. Oh yeah, Forever War is a pretty good one. Gosh, I haven't read that in forever. I should get around to that. Oh, actually, you know what? I might be confusing it with Time for the Stars. Which is Forever War? Oh, that's the one. I do get the two confused, and the reason I get the two confused is because they kind of overlap conceptually. Forever War is the one where, uh, because he keeps being sent out into conflict, he winds up society changes radically around this particular individual to the point that it's unrecognizable, and they have like call it a reservation for older people, people from a bygone era, because people have switched to a more open lifestyle, let's say. Um, I think that's the Forever War. Time for the Stars is a bit more heavy-fisted about the whole time travel aspect. Um, Less about the societal impacts. Yeah, Haldeman. Okay, okay. I do have that. It's just buried a layer deep on my wall. Um, Probably right behind Time for the Stars. That's a good one. I realize I may have just spoiled that for anyone who hasn't read it, but I'll get around to that one eventually. It occurs to me I haven't read much Haldeman on this stream. I should really do that. Some of his stuff's quite good. All right, just give me one sec here. There we go. So now we start the first tale entitled Sultana's Dream by Rokeya Sakhavat Hossein. One evening I was lounging in an easy chair in my bedroom and thinking lazily of the condition of Indian womanhood. I am not sure whether I dozed off or not, but as far as I remember I was wide awake. I saw the moonlit sky sparkling with thousands of diamond-like stars very distinctly. All of a sudden a lady stood before me. How she came in I do not know. Oh, I should give dates. This one is from 1905. They don't list that next to the story. They do it in the table of contents, though. Sultana's Dream from 1905. All of a sudden a lady stood before me. How she came in I do not know. I took her for my friend, Sister Sarah. "Good morning," said Sister Sarah. I smiled inwardly, as I knew it was not morning, but starry night. However, I replied to her, saying, "How do you do?" "I am all right, thank you. Will you please come out and have a look at our garden?" I looked again at the moon through the open window, and thought there was no harm in going out at that time. The men servants outside were fast asleep just then, and I could have a pleasant walk with Sister Sarah. I used to have my walks with Sister Sarah when we were at Darjeeling. Many a time did we walk hand in hand, and talk light-heartedly in the botanical gardens there. I fancied Sister Sarah had probably come to take me to some such garden. To some such garden. No, the entire rhythm gets thrown. I fancied Sister Sarah had probably come to take me to some such garden, and I readily accepted her offer and went out with her. When walking, I found to my surprise that it was a fine morning. The town was fully awake, and the streets alive with bustling crowds. I was feeling very shy, thinking I was walking in the street in broad daylight, but there was not a single man visible. Some of the passers-by made jokes at me. Though I could not understand their language, yet I felt sure they were joking. I asked my friend, "What do they say?" "The women say that you look very mannish." "Mannish?" said I. What do they mean by that?" "They mean that you are shy and timid like men." Shy and timid like men? It was really a joke. I became very nervous, and when I found that my companion was not Sister Sarah, but a stranger. Oh, what a fool I had been to mistake this lady for my dear old friend, Sister Sarah. She felt my fingers tremble in her hand as we were walking hand in hand. "What is the matter, dear?" she said affectionately. "I feel somewhat awkward," I said in a rather apologizing tone, "as being a oh, boy. Purdanishin woman, I am not accustomed to walking about unveiled." "You need not be afraid of coming across a man here. This is Ladyland, free from sin and harm. Virtue herself reigns here." By and by I was enjoying the scenery. Really, it was very grand. I mistook a patch of green grass for a velvet cushion. Feeling as if I were walking on a soft carpet, I looked down and found the path covered with moss and flowers. "How nice it is!" said I. "Do you like it?" asked Sister Sarah. I continued calling her Sister Sarah, and she kept calling me by my name. "Yes, very much, but I do not like to tread on the tender and sweet flowers." "Never mind, dear Sultana, your treading will not harm them. They are street flowers." "The whole place looks like a garden," said I admiringly. "You have arranged every plant so skilfully." Your Calcutta could become a nicer garden than this, if only your countrymen wanted to make it so. They would think it useless to give so much attention to horticulture, while they have so many other things to do. They could not find a better excuse, said she with a smile. I became very curious to know where the men were. I met more than 100 women while walking there, but not a single man. Where are the men? I asked her. In their proper places, where they ought to be. Pray let me know what you mean by their proper places. Oh, I see my mistake. You cannot know our customs, as you were never here before. We shut our men indoors. Just as we are kept in the zenana? Exactly so. How funny! I burst into a laugh. Sister Sarah laughed too. But, dear Sultana, how unfair it is to shut the harmless women uh, how unfair it is to shut in the harmless women and let loose the men. Why, it is not safe for us to come out of the zenana, as we are naturally weak. Yes, it is not safe so long as there are men about the streets, nor is it so when a wild animal enters a marketplace. Of course not. Suppose some lunatics escape from the asylum and begin to do all sorts of mischief to men, horses, and other creatures. In that case, what will your countrymen do? They will try to capture them and put them back into their asylum. Thank you. And you do not think it wise to keep sane people inside an asylum and let loose the insane? Of course not, said I, laughing lightly. As a matter of fact, in your country this very thing is done. Men who do or are at least capable of doing no end of mischief are let loose, and the innocent women shut up in the zenana. How can you trust those untrained men out of doors? We have no hand or voice in the management of our social affairs. In India, man is lord and master. He has taken to himself all powers and privileges, and shut up the women in the zenana. Why do you allow yourselves to be shut up? Because it cannot be helped, as they are stronger than women. A lion is stronger than a man, but it does not enable him to dominate the human race. You have neglected the duty you owe to yourselves, and you have lost your natural rights by shutting your eyes to your own interests. But, my dear sister Sarah, if we do everything by ourselves, what will the men do then? They should not do anything. Excuse me. They are fit for nothing. Only catch them and put them into the zenana. But would it be very easy to catch and put them inside the four walls? Said I. And even if this were done, would all their business, political and commercial, also go with them into the zenana? I'm probably mangling whatever that word is. Zenana. I don't know offhand how that is pronounced. Sister Sarah made no reply. She only smiled sweetly. Perhaps she thought it was useless to argue with one who was no better than a frog in a well. By this time we reached Sister Sarah's house. It was situated in a beautiful heart-shaped garden. It was a bungalow with a corrugated iron roof. It was cooler and nicer than any of our rich buildings. I cannot begin to describe how neat and how nicely furnished and how tastefully decorated it was. We sat side by side. She brought out of the parlour a piece of embroidery work, and began putting on a fresh design. Do you know knitting and needlework? Yes, we have nothing else to do in our zenana. But we do not trust our zenana members with embroidery, she said, laughing, as a man has not patience enough to pass thread through a needle-hole, even. Have you done all this work yourself? I asked her, pointing to the various pieces of embroidered tepoy cloths. Yes. How can you find time to do all these? You have to do the office work as well, have you not? Yes. I do not stick to the laboratory all day long. I finish my work in 2 hours. In 2 hours? How do you manage? In our land the officers, magistrates for instance, work 7 hours daily. I have seen some of them doing their work. Do you think they work all the 7 hours? Certainly they do. No, dear Sultana, they do not. They dawdle away their time in smoking. Some smoke 2 or 3 cheroots during the office time. They talk much about their work, but do little. Suppose one cheroot takes half an hour to burn off, and a man smokes 12 cheroots daily. Then, you see, he wastes 6 hours every day in sheer smoking. We talked on various subjects, and I learned that they were not subject to any kind of epidemic disease, nor do they suffer from mosquito bites as we do. I was very much astonished to hear that in Ladyland no one died in youth except by rare accident. "Will you care to see our kitchen?" she asked me. "With pleasure," said I, and we went to see it. Of course, the men had been asked to clear off when I was going there. The kitchen was situated in a beautiful vegetable garden. Every creeper, every tomato plant was itself an ornament. I found no smoke, nor any chimney either in the kitchen. It was clean and bright. The windows were decorated with flower gardens. There was no sign of coal or fire. "How do you cook?" I asked. "With solar heat," she said, at the same time showing me the pipe through which passed the concentrated sunlight and heat. She cooked something then and there to show me the process. "How did you manage to gather and store up the sun heat?" I asked her in amazement. "Let me tell you a little of our past history, then. 30 years ago, when our present queen was 13 years old, she inherited the throne. She was queen in name only, the prime minister really ruling the country. Our good queen liked science very much. She circulated an order that all the women in her country should be educated. Accordingly, a number of girls' schools were founded and supported by the government. Education was spread far and wide among women, and early marriage was also stopped. No woman was to be allowed to marry before she was 21. I must tell you that before this change we had been kept in strict purdah. "How the tables are turned!" I interposed with a laugh. "But the seclusion is the same," she said. "In a few years we had separate universities, where no men were admitted. In the capital, where our queen lives, there are 2 universities. One of these invented a wonderful balloon, to which they attached a number of pipes. By means of this captive balloon, which they managed to keep afloat above the cloud land, they could draw as much water from the atmosphere as they pleased. As the water was incessantly being drawn by the university people, no cloud gathered, and the ingenious lady principal stopped rain and storms thereby. Sorry. "Really, now I understand why there is no mud here," said I. But I could not understand how it was possible to accumulate water in the pipes. She explained to me how it was done, but I was unable to understand her, as my scientific knowledge was very limited. However, she went on. "When the other university came to know of this, they became exceedingly jealous, and tried to do something more extraordinary still. They invented an instrument by which they could collect as much sun heat as they wanted, and they kept the heat stored up to be distributed among others as required. While the women were engaged in scientific research, the men of this country were busy increasing their military power. When they came to know that the female universities were able to draw water from the atmosphere and collect heat from the sun, they only laughed at the members of the universities, and called the whole thing a sentimental nightmare." "Your achievements are very wonderful indeed. But tell me how you managed to put the men of your country into the zenana. Did you entrap them first?" "No." "It is not likely that they would surrender their free and open-air life of their own accord, and confine themselves within the 4 walls of the zenana. They must have been overpowered."
"Yes, they have been."
"By whom? By some lady warriors, I suppose?"
"No, not by arms."
"Yes, it cannot be so. Men's arms are stronger than women's. Then—"
"By brain."
"Even their brains are bigger and heavier than women's, are they not?"
"Yes, but what of that? An elephant also has got a bigger and heavier brain than a man has. Yet man can enchain elephants and employ them, according to their own wishes."
Well said, but tell me, please, how it all actually happened. I am dying to know it.
Women's brains are somewhat quicker than men's. 10 years ago, when the military officers called our scientific discoveries a sentimental nightmare, some of the young ladies wanted to say something in reply to those remarks. But both the lady principals restrained them, and said they should reply not by word, but by deed, if ever they got the opportunity. And they had not long to wait for that opportunity.
How marvellous! I heartily clapped my hands. And now the proud gentlemen are dreaming sentimental dreams themselves.
Soon afterwards, certain persons came from a neighboring country, and took shelter in ours. They were in trouble, having committed some political offence. The king, who cared more for power than for good government, asked our kind-hearted queen to hand them over to his officers. She refused, as it was against her principle to turn out refugees. For this refusal the king declared war against our country. Our military officers sprang to their feet at once, and marched out to meet the enemy. The enemy, however, was too strong for them. Our soldiers fought bravely, no doubt, but in spite of all their bravery, the foreign army advanced step by step to invade our country. Nearly all the men had gone out to fight. Even a boy of 16 was not left home. Most of our warriors were killed, the rest driven back, and the enemy came within 25 miles of the capital. A meeting of a number of wise ladies was held at the Queen's palace to advise as to what should be done to save the land. Some proposed to fight like soldiers. Others objected, and said that women were not trained to fight with swords and guns, nor were they accustomed to fighting with any weapons. A third party regretfully remarked that they were hopelessly weak of body.
If you cannot save your country for lack of physical strength, said the Queen, try to do so by brain power.
There was dead silence for a few minutes. Her Royal Highness said again,
I must commit suicide if the land and my honour are lost.
Then the lady principal of the second university, who had collected sun heat, who had been silently thinking during the consultation, remarked that they were all but lost, and that there was little hope left for them. There was, however, one plan which she would like to try, and this would be her first and last efforts. If she failed in this, there would be nothing left but to commit suicide. All present solemnly vowed that they would never allow themselves to be enslaved, no matter what happened. The Queen thanked them heartily, and asked the lady principal to try her plan. The lady principal rose again, and said,
Before we go out, the men must enter the zananas. I make this prayer for the sake of Purda.
Yes, of course, replied her Royal Highness. On the following day the Queen called upon all men to retire into zananas, for the sake of honour and liberty. Wounded and tired as they were, they took that order rather for a boon. They bowed low and entered the zananas without uttering a single word of protest. They were sure that there was no hope for this country at all. Then the lady principal with her 2,000 students marched to the battlefield, and, arriving there, directed all the rays of the concentrated sunlight and heat towards the enemy. The heat and light were too much for them to bear. They all ran away panic-stricken, not knowing in their bewilderment how to counteract that scorching heat. When they fled away, leaving their guns and other ammunitions of war, they were burnt down by means of the same sun heat. Since then, no one has tried to invade our country any more.
And since then your countrymen never tried to come out of the zanana?
Yes, they wanted to be free. Some of the police commissioners and district magistrates sent word to the Queen to the effect that the military officers certainly deserved to be imprisoned for their failure, but they had never neglected their duty, and therefore they should not be punished, and they prayed to be restored to their respective offices. Her Royal Highness sent them a circular letter, intimating to them that if their services should ever be needed, they would be sent for, and that in the meanwhile they should remain where they were. Now that they are accustomed to the Purdah system, and have ceased to grumble at their seclusion, we call the system Mardana instead of Zenana. But how do you manage, I asked Sister Sarah, to do without the police or magistrates in case of theft or murder? Since the Mardana system has been established, there has been no more crime or sin. Therefore, we do not require policemen to find out a culprit, nor do we want a magistrate to try a criminal case. That is very good indeed. I suppose if there was any dishonest person, you could very easily chastise her. As you gained a decisive victory without shedding a single drop of blood, you could drive off crime and criminals too without much difficulty. Now, dear Sultana, will you sit here or come to my parlour? She asked me. Your kitchen is not inferior to a queen's boudoir, I replied with a pleasant smile, but we must leave it now, for the gentlemen may be cursing me for keeping them away from their duties in the kitchen so long. We both laughed heartily. How my friends at home will be amused and amazed when I go back and tell them that in the far-off that when I go back and tell them that in the far-off Ladyland, ladies rule over the country and control all social matters, while gentlemen are kept in the Mardanas to mind babies, to cook, and to do all sorts of domestic work, and that cooking is so easy a thing that it is simply a pleasure to cook. Yes, tell them about all that you see here. Please let me know how you carry on land cultivation and how cul- Please let me know how you carry on land cultivation and how you plough the land and do other hard manual work. Our fields are tilled by means of electricity, which supplies motive power for other hard work as well, and we employ it for our aerial conveyances too. We have no railroad nor any paved streets here. Therefore neither street nor railway accidents occur here, said I. Do not you ever suffer from want of rainwater? I asked. Never since the water balloon has been set up. You see the big balloon and pipes attached thereto. By their aid we can draw as much rainwater as we require. Nor do we ever suffer from flood or thunderstorms. We are all very busy making nature yield as much as she can. We do not find time to quarrel with one another, as we never sit idle. Our noble queen is exceedingly fond of botany. It is her ambition to convert the whole country into one grand garden. The idea is excellent. What is your chief food? Fruits. How do you keep your country cool in hot weather? We regard the rainfall in summer as a blessing from heaven. When the heat becomes unbearable, we sprinkle the ground with plentiful showers drawn from the artificial fountains, and in cold weather we keep our room warm with sun heat. She showed me her bathroom, the roof of which was removable. She could enjoy a shower bath whenever she liked by simply removing the roof, which was like the lid of a box, and turning on the tap of a shower pipe. You are lucky people, ejaculated I. You know no want. What is your religion, may I ask? Our religion is based on love and truth. It is our religious duty to love one another and to be absolutely truthful. If any person lies, she or he is punished with death? No, not with death. We do not take pleasure in killing a creature of God, especially a human being. The liar is asked to leave this land for good, and never to come to it again. Is an offender never forgiven? Never forgiven? Yes, if that person repents sincerely. Are you not allowed to see any man except your own relations? No one except sacred relations. Our circle of sacred relations is very limited. Even first cousins are not sacred. But ours is very large. A distant cousin is as sacred as a brother. That is very good. I see purity itself reigns over your land. I should like to see the good queen who is so sagacious and far-sighted, and who has made all these rules. All right, said Sister Sarah. Then she screwed a couple of seats onto a square piece of plank. To this plank she attached two smooth and well-polished balls. When I asked her what the balls were for, she said that they were hydrogen balls, and they were used to overcome the force of gravity. The balls were of different capacities, to be used according to the different weights desired to be overcome. Then she fastened to the air car two wing-like blades, which, she said, were worked by electricity. After we were comfortably seated, she touched a knob, and the blades began to whirl, moving faster and faster every moment. At first we were raised to the height of about 6 or 7 feet, and then off we flew. And before I could realize that we had commenced moving, we reached the garden of the Queen. My friend lowered the air car by reversing the action of the machine, and when the car touched the ground, the machine was stopped, and we got out. I had seen from the air car the Queen walking on a garden path with her little daughter, who was 4 years old, and her maids of honor. "Halloo! You here!" cried the Queen, addressing Sister Sarah. I was introduced to Her Royal Highness, and was received by her cordially without any ceremony. I was very much delighted to make her acquaintance. In the course of the conversation I had with her, the Queen told me that she had no objection to permitting her subjects to trade with other countries. "But," she continued, "no trade was possible with countries where the women were kept in the zenanas, and so unable to come and trade with us. Men, we find, are rather of lower morals, and so we do not like dealing with them. We do not covet other people's land, we do not fight for a piece of diamond, though it may be 1,000-fold brighter than the Koh-i-Noor, nor do we grudge a ruler his peacock throne. We dive deep into the ocean of knowledge and try to find out the precious gems which nature has kept in store for us. We enjoy nature's gifts as much as we can." After taking leave of the Queen, I visited the famous universities, and was shown some of their manufactories, laboratories, and observatories. After visiting the above places of interest, we got again into the air car, but as soon as it began moving, I somehow slipped down, and the fall startled me out of my dream. And on opening my eyes, I found myself in my own bedroom, still lounging in the easy chair. And that was Sultana's Dream from 1905 by Rokeya Sakawat Hossein. That one was cute. Oh, thanks for tuning in, Rewind Cat. Welcome to the party. That one was cute. I liked that. Female empowerment back in 1905 in a big way. I like that a lot. Oh, yeah, men are just violent monsters. You gotta lock them up in the Zananas, man. That way they can do all the cooking. I like it. I mean, that's incredibly progressive for the time. Jeez, you could have gotten in trouble for that back then. Anyway, that one was cute. I liked that. Harnessing sun power and the clouds. That one's cute. I enjoyed that. So next up we have, let me get a little more water in me here. Incidentally, I'm glad you enjoyed Snow Crash. I thought that one went pretty well. Plus, it's a fun book. Snow Crash is a ton of fun. So next up we've got The Voice in the Night from 1907 by William Hope Hodgson. I should learn who some of these people are. Like, I know the name EM4. I think it's EM. No. WEB. I know I mean, Arthur Conan Doyle, obviously. Um, I recognize the name WEB Dubois, but I'm not. William Hope Hodgson, I don't think I know. The author of The Last Story, I don't know. Neil R. Jones doesn't ring any bells. Jack London obviously does. Ian Forster is vaguely familiar, but I don't know why. He might have written something that I read in a pulp magazine. Anyway, um, The Voice in the Night from 1907 by William Hope Hodgson. It was a dark, starless night.
We were becalmed in the northern Pacific. Our exact position I do not know, for the sun had been hidden during the course of a weary, breathless week by a thin haze which had seemed to float above us, about the height of our mastheads, at whiles descending and shrouding the surrounding sea. With there being no wind, we had steadied the tiller, and I was the only man on deck. The crew, consisting of 2 men and a boy, were sleeping for'ard in their den, while Will, my friend and the master of our little craft, was aft in his bunk on the port side of the little cabin. Suddenly, from out of the surrounding darkness, there came a hail, "Schooner, ahoy!" The cry was so unexpected that I gave no immediate answer, because of my surprise. It came again, a voice curiously throaty and inhuman, calling from somewhere upon the dark sea away on our port broadside, "Schooner, ahoy!" "Hullo!" I sung out, having gathered my wits somewhat. "What are you? What do you want?" "You need not be afraid," answered the queer voice, having probably noticed some trace of confusion in my tone. "I am only an old man." The pause sounded oddly, but it was only afterwards that it came back to me with any significance. "Why don't you come alongside, then?" "Why don't you come alongside, then?" I queried somewhat snappishly, for I liked not his hinting at my having been a trifle shaking. "I can't. It wouldn't be safe. The voice broke off, and there was silence. "What do you mean?" I asked, growing more and more astonished. "Why not safe? Where are you?" I listened for a moment, but there came no answer. And then a sudden indefinite suspicion, of I knew not what, coming to me, I stepped swiftly to the binnacle, and took out the lighted lamp. At the same time I knocked on the deck with my heel to waken Will. Then I was back at the side, throwing the yellow funnel of light out into the silent immensity beyond our rail. As I did so I heard a slight, muffled cry, and then the sound of a splash as though someone had dipped oars abruptly. Yet I cannot say that I saw anything with certainty, save, it seemed to me, that with the first flash of the light there had been something upon the waters, where now there was nothing. "Hallo there!" I called. "What foolery is this?" But there came only the indistinct sounds of a boat being pulled away into the night. Then I heard Will's voice from the direction of the after scuttle. "What's up, George?" "Come here, Will," I said. "What is it?" he asked, coming across the deck. I told him the queer thing which had happened. He put several questions. Then, after a moment's silence, he raised his hands to his lips, and hailed, "Boat ahoy!" From a long distance away there came back to us a faint reply, and my companion repeated his call. Presently, after a short period of silence, there grew on our hearing the muffled sounds of oars, at which Will hailed again. This time there was a reply.
"Put away the light."
"I'm damned if I will," I muttered, but Will told me to do as the voice bade, and I shoved it down under the bulwarks.
"Come nearer," he said,
and the oar strokes continued. Then, when apparently some half-dozen fathoms distant, they again ceased.
"Come alongside," exclaimed Will. "There's nothing to be frightened of aboard here. Promise that you will not show the light."
"What's to do with you," I burst out, "that you're so infernally afraid of the light?"
"Because,"
began the voice, and stopped short. "Because what?" I asked quickly. Will put his hand on my shoulder.
"Shut up a minute, old man," he said in a low voice. "Let me tackle 'em."
He leant more over the rail.
"See here, mister," he said, "this is a pretty queer business, you coming up on us like this, right out in the middle of the blessed Pacific. How are we to know what sort of hanky-panky trick you're up to? You say there's only one of you. How are we to know unless we get a squint at you, eh? What's your objection to the light, anyway?" As he finished, I heard the noise of the oars again, and then the voice came,
but now from a greater distance, and sounding extremely hopeless and pathetic.
I am sorry, sorry. I would not have troubled you, only I am hungry, and so is she.
The voice died away, and the sound of the oars, dipping irregularly, was borne to us.
Stop, sung out Will. I don't want to drive you away. Come back. We'll keep the light hidden if you don't like it.
He turned to me.
It's a damn queer rig, this, but I think there's nothing to be afraid of.
Oh, no, there is a question mark there. I didn't read that. I read that aloud wrong.
It's a damn queer rig, this. It's a damn queer rig, this, but I think there's nothing to be afraid of.
There was a question in his tone, and I replied, "No, I think the poor devil's been wrecked around here, and gone crazy." The sound of the oars drew nearer.
Shove that lamp back in the binnacle.
"Back in the binnacle," said Will, and he leaned over the rail and listened. I replaced the lamp and came back to his side. The dipping of the oars ceased some dozen yards distant.
Won't you come alongside now? Asked Will in an even voice. I've had the lamp put back in the binnacle. I cannot, replied the voice. I dare not come nearer. I dare not even pay you for the provisions. That's all right, said Will, and hesitated. You're welcome to as much grub as you can take.
Again he hesitated.
You are very good, exclaimed the voice. May God, who understands everything, reward you.
It broke off huskily.
The lady, said Will abruptly, is she? I have left her behind upon the island, came the voice.
What island? I cut in. I know not its name. Oh, sorry.
I know not its name, returned the voice. I would to God,
it began, and checked itself as suddenly.
Could we not send a boat for her? Asked Will at this point. No, said the voice, with extraordinary emphasis. My God, no!
There was a moment's pause. Then it added, in a tone which seemed a merited reproach,
It was because of our want that I ventured, because her agony tortured me.
I am a forgetful brute, exclaimed Will.
Just wait a minute, whoever you are, and I will bring you up something at once.
In a couple of minutes he was back again, and his arms were full of various edibles. He paused at the rail.
Can't you come alongside for them? He asked. No, I dare not,
replied the voice. And it seemed to me that in its tones I detected a note of stifled craving, as though the owner hushed a mortal desire. It came to me then in a flash that the poor old creature out there in the darkness was suffering for actual need of that which Will held in his arms, and yet, because of some unintelligible dread, refraining from dashing to the side of our little schooner and receiving it. And with the lightning-like conviction there came the knowledge that the invisible was not mad, but sanely facing some intolerable horror. "Damn it, Will!" I said, full of many feelings over which predominated a vast sympathy. "Get a box. We must float off the stuff to him in it." Can I just read that, or is that really that disjointed sounding? Get a box. We must float off the stuff to him in it. Yeah, okay, no, that's fine. This we did, propelling it away from the vessel, out into the darkness, by means of a boat-hook. In a minute a slight cry from the invisible came to us, and we knew that he had secured the box. A little later he called out a farewell to us, and so heartful a blessing that I am sure we were the better for it. Then, without more ado, we heard the ply of oars across the darkness.
Pretty soon off, remarked Will, with perhaps just a little sense of injury.
Wait, I replied. Think somehow he'll come back. I think somehow he'll come back. He must have been badly needing that food.
And the lady,
said Will. For a moment he was silent, and then he continued.
It's the queerest thing I've ever tumbled across since I've been fishing. Ever since I've... It's the queerest thing I've ever tumbled across since I've been fishing. Yes, I said, and fell to pondering. And so the time slipped away. An hour, another, and still Will stayed with me, for the queer adventure had knocked all desire for sleep out of him. The third hour was 3 parts through, when we heard again the sound of oars across the silent ocean. "Listen!" said Will, a low note of excitement in his voice. "He's coming, just as I thought," I muttered. The dipping of the oars grew nearer, and I noted that the strokes were firmer and longer. The food had been needed. They came to a stop a little distance off the broadside, and the queer voice came again to us through the darkness. "Schooner, ahoy!" "That you?" "Yes," replied the voice. "I left you suddenly, but there was great need." "The lady?" questioned Will. "The lady is grateful now on earth. She will be more grateful soon in heaven." Will began to make some reply in a puzzled voice, but became confused and broke off short. I said nothing. I said nothing. I was wondering at the curious pauses, and, apart from my wonder, I was full of a great sympathy. The voice continued. She and I, have talked as we shared the result of God's tenderness and yours." Will interposed, but without coherence. "I beg of you not to belittle your deed of Christian charity this night," said the voice. "Be sure that it has not escaped his notice." It stopped, and there was a full minute's silence. Then it came again. "We have spoken together upon that which has befallen us. We had thought to go out without telling any of the terror which has come into our lives. She is with me in believing that tonight's happenings are under a special ruling, and that it is God's wish that we should tell to you all that we have suffered since... "Yes?" said Will softly. "Since the sinking of the Albatross." "Ah!" I exclaimed involuntarily. "She left Newcastle for Frisco some 6 months ago, and hasn't been heard of since." "Yes," answered the voice, "but some few degrees to the north of the line she was caught in a terrible storm and dismasted. When the day came, it was found that she was leaking badly." Oh, is that Will? No, that's the voice. "When the day came, it was found that she was leaking badly, and presently, it falling to a calm, the sailors took to the boats, leaving a young lady, my fiancée, and myself upon the wreck. We were below, gathering together a few of our belongings when they left. They were entirely callous through fear, and when we came up upon the deck we saw them only as small shapes afar off upon the horizon. Yet we did not despair, but set to work and constructed a small raft. Upon this we put such few matters as it would hold, including a quantity of water and some ship's biscuit. Then, the vessel being very deep in the water, we got ourselves on to the raft and pushed off. It was later when I observed that we seemed to be in the way of some tide or current, which bore us from the ship at an angle, so that in the course of 3 hours, by my watch, her hull became invisible to our sight, her broken masts remaining in view for a somewhat longer period. Then, towards evening, it grew misty, and so through the night. The next day we were still encompassed by the mist, the weather remaining quiet. For 4 days we drifted through this strange haze, until, on the evening of the 4th day, there grew upon our ears the murmur of breakers at a distance. Gradually it became plainer, and, somewhat after midnight, it appeared to sound upon either hand at no very great space. The raft was raised upon a swell several times, and then we were in smooth water, and the noise of the breakers was behind. When the morning came, we found that we were in a sort of great lagoon. But of this we noticed little at the time, for close before us, through the enshrouding mist, loomed the hull of a large sailing vessel. With one accord we fell upon our knees and thanked God, for we thought that here was an end to our perils. We had much to learn. The raft drew near to the ship, and we shouted on them to take us aboard, but none answered. Presently the raft touched against the side of the vessel, and, seeing a rope hanging downwards, I seized it and began to climb. Yet I had much ado to make my way up, because a kind of grey lichenous fungus, which had seized upon the rope, and which blotched the side of the ship lividly. I reached the rail and clambered over it, on to the deck. Here I saw that the decks were covered, in great patches, with grey masses, some of them rising into nodules several feet in height, but at the time I thought less of this matter than of the possibility of there being people aboard the ship. I shouted, but none answered. Then I went to the door below the poop deck. I opened it and peered in. There was a great smell of staleness, so that I knew in a moment that nothing living was within, and with the knowledge I shut the door quickly, for I felt suddenly lonely. I went back to the side where I had scrambled up. My sweetheart was still sitting quietly upon the raft. Seeing me look down, she called up to know whether there were any aboard of the ship. I replied that the vessel had the appearance of having been long deserted, but that if she would wait a little longer I would see whether there was anything in the shape of a ladder by which she could ascend to the deck. Then we would make a search through the vessel together. A little later, on the opposite side of the decks, I found a rope side ladder. This I carried across, and a minute afterwards she was beside me. Together we explored the cabins and apartments in the after part of the ship, but nowhere was there any sign of life. Here and there within the cabins themselves we came across odd patches of that queer fungus, but this, as my sweetheart said, could be cleansed away. In the end, having assured ourselves that the after portion of the vessel was empty, we picked our ways to the bows, between the ugly grey nodules of that strange growth, and here we made a further search, which told us that there was indeed none aboard but ourselves. This being now beyond any doubt, we returned to the stern of the ship, and proceeded to make ourselves as comfortable as possible. Together we cleared out and cleaned two of the cabins, and after that I made examination whether there was anything eatable in the ship. This I soon found was so, and thanked God in my heart for his goodness. In addition to this, I discovered the whereabouts of the fresh-water pump, and having fixed it, I found the water drinkable, though somewhat unpleasant to the taste. For several days we stayed aboard the ship without attempting to get to the shore. We were busily engaged in making the place habitable. Yet even thus early we became aware that our lot was even less to be desired than might have been imagined. For though, as a first step, we scraped away the odd patches of growth that studded the floors and walls of the cabins and saloon, yet they returned almost to their normal size within the space of 24 hours, which not only discouraged us, but gave us a feeling of vague unease. Still, we would not admit ourselves beaten, so set to work afresh, and not only scraped away the fungus, but soaked the places where it had been with carbolic, a canful of which I had found in the pantry. Yet by the end of the week the growth had returned in full strength, and, in addition, it had spread to other places, as though our touching it had allowed germs from it to travel elsewhere. On the seventh morning my sweetheart woke to find a small patch of it growing on her pillow, close to her face. At that she came to me, so soon as she could get her garments upon her. I was in the galley at the time, lighting the fire for breakfast. "Come here, John," she said, and led me aft. When I saw the thing upon her pillow I shuddered, and then and there we agreed to go right out of the ship, and see whether we could not fare to make ourselves more comfortable ashore. Hurriedly we gathered together our few belongings, and even among these I found that the fungus had been at work, for one of her shawls had a little lump of it growing near one edge. I threw the whole thing over the side, without saying anything to her. The raft was still alongside, but it was too clumsy to guide, and I lowered down a small boat that hung across the stern, and in this we made our way to the shore. Yet, as we drew near to it, I became gradually aware that here the vile fungus which had driven us from the ship was growing riot. In places it rose into horrible, fantastic mounds, which seemed almost to quiver, as with a quiet life, when the wind blew across them. Here and there it took on the forms of vast fingers, and in others it just spread out flat and smooth and treacherous. Odd places it appeared as grotesque stunted trees, seeming extraordinarily kinked and gnarled, the whole quaking vilely at times. At first it seemed to us that there was no single portion of the surrounding shore which was not hidden beneath the masses of the hideous lichen. Yet in this I found we were mistaken, for somewhat later, coasting along the shore at a little distance, we descried oh my God. Sorry, this voice is killing me. For somewhat later, coasting along the shore at a little distance, we descried a smooth white patch of what appeared to be fine sand, and there we landed. It was not sand. What it was I do not know. All that I have observed is that upon it the fungus will not grow, while everywhere else, save where the sand-like earth wanders oddly, pathwise, amid the grey desolation of the lichen, there is nothing but that loathsome greyness. It is difficult to make you understand how cheered we were to find one place that was absolutely free from the growth, and here we deposited our belongings. Then we went back to the ship for such things as it seemed to us we should need. Among other matters, I managed to bring ashore with me one of the ship's sails, with which I constructed two small tents, which, though exceedingly rough-shaped, served the purpose for which they were intended. In these we lived, and stored our various necessities, and thus, for a matter of some 4 weeks, all went smoothly and without particular unhappiness. Indeed, I may say with much of happiness, for we were together. It was on the thumb of her right hand that the growth first showed. It was only a small circular spot, much like a little grey mole. My God, how the fear leapt to my heart when she showed me the place! We cleansed it between us, washing it with carbolic and water. In the morning of the following day she showed her hand to me again. The grey warty thing had returned. For a little while we looked at one another in silence. Then, still wordless, we started again to remove it. In the midst of the operation, she spoke suddenly. "What's that on the side of your face, dear?" Her voice was sharp with anxiety. I put my hand up to feel. "There, under the hair by your ear. A little to the front a bit." My finger rested upon the place, and then I knew. "Let us get your thumb done first," I said, and she submitted, only because she was afraid to touch me until it was cleansed. I finished washing and disinfecting her thumb, and then she turned to my face. After it was finished, we sat together and talked a while of many things, for there had come into our lives sudden, very terrible thoughts. We were, all at once, afraid of something worse than death. We spoke of loading the boat with provisions and water and making our way out onto the sea. Yet we were helpless for many causes, and the growth had attacked us already. We decided to stay. God would do with us as was His will. We would wait. A month, 2 months, 3 months passed, and the places grew somewhat, and there had come others. Yet we fought so strenuously with the fear that its headway was slow, comparatively speaking. Occasionally we ventured off to the ship for such stores as we needed. There we found that the fungus grew persistently. One of the nodules on the main deck became soon as high as my head. We had now given up all thought or hope of leaving the island. We had realized that it would be unallowable to go among healthy humans, with the things from which we were suffering. With this determination and knowledge in our minds, we knew that we should have to husband our food and water, for we did not know at that time but that we should possibly live for many years. This reminds me that I have told you that I am an old man. Judged by the years, this is not so, but
He broke off, then continued somewhat abruptly.
as I was saying, we knew that we should have to use care in the matter of food, but we had no idea then how little food there was left of which to take care. It was a week later that I made the discovery that all other bread tanks, which I had supposed full, were empty, and that, beyond odd tins of vegetables and meat, and some other matters, we had nothing on which to depend but the bread in the tank, which I had already opened. After learning this, I bestirred myself to do what I could, and set to work at fishing in the lagoon, but with no success. At this I was somewhat inclined to feel desperate, until the thought came to try the outside of the lagoon, in the open sea. Here, at times, I caught odd fish, but so infrequently that they proved of but little help in keeping us from the hunger which threatened. It seemed to me that our deaths were likely to come by hunger, and not by the growth of the thing which had seized upon our bodies. We were in this state of mind when the 4th month wore out, when I made a very horrible discovery. One morning, a little before midday, I came off from the ship with a portion of the biscuits which were left. In the mouth of her tent I saw my sweetheart sitting, eating something. "What is it, my dear?" I called out as I leapt ashore. Yet, on hearing my voice, she seemed confused, and, turning, slyly threw something towards the edge of the little clearing. It fell short, and a vague suspicion having arisen within me, I walked across and picked it up. It was a piece of the grey fungus. As I went to her with it in my hand, she turned deadly pale, then rose red. I felt strangely dazed and frightened. my dear, I said, and could say no more. Yet at these words she broke down and cried bitterly. Gradually, as she calmed, I got from her the news that she had tried it the preceding day, and liked it. I got her to promise on her knees not to touch it again, however great our hunger. After she had promised, she told me that the desire for it had come suddenly, and that, until the moment of desire, she had experienced nothing towards it but the most extreme repulsion. Later in the day, feeling strangely restless, and much shaken with the thing which I had discovered, I made my way along one of the twisted paths, formed by the white, sand-like substance, which led among the fungoid growth. I had, once before, ventured along there, but not to any great distance. This time, being involved in perplexing thought, I went much further than hitherto. Suddenly I was called to myself by a queer hoarse sound on my left. Turning quickly, I saw that there was movement among an extraordinarily shaped mass of fungus close to my elbow. It was swaying uneasily, as though it possessed life of its own. Abruptly, as I stared, the thought came to me that the thing had a grotesque resemblance to the figure of a distorted human creature. Even as the fancy flashed into my brain, there was a slight, sickening noise of tearing, and I saw that one of the branch-like arms was detaching itself from the surrounding grey masses and coming towards me. The head of the thing, a shapeless grey ball, inclined in my direction. I stood stupidly, and the vile arm brushed across my face. I gave out a frightened cry and ran back a few paces. There was a sweetish taste upon my lips where the thing had touched me. I licked them, and was immediately filled with an inhuman desire. I turned and seized a mass of the fungus. Then more and more. I was insatiable. In the midst of devouring, the remembrance of the morning's discovery swept into my mazed brain. It was sent by God. I dashed the fragment I held to the ground. Then, utterly wretched and feeling a dreadful guiltiness, I made my way back to the little encampment. I think she knew, by some marvellous intuition which love must have given, so soon as she set eyes on me. Her quiet sympathy made it easier for me, and I told her of my sudden weakness, yet omitted to mention the extraordinary thing which had gone before. I desired to spare her all unnecessary terror. But for myself I had added an intolerable knowledge, to breed an incessant terror in my brain, for I doubted not that I had seen the end of one of those men who had come to the island in the ship in the lagoon, and in that monstrous ending I had seen our own. Thereafter we kept from the abominable food, though the desire for it had entered into our blood. Yet our drear punishment was upon us, for day by day, with monstrous rapidity, the fungoid growth took hold of our poor bodies. Nothing we could do would check it materially, and so, we who had been human became, well, it matters less each day. Only we had been man and maid. And day by day the fight is more dreadful, to withstand the hunger lust for the terrible lichen. A week ago we ate the last of the biscuit, and since that time I have caught 3 fish. I was out here fishing tonight when your schooner drifted upon me out of the mist. I hailed you. You know the rest, and may God, out of his great heart, bless you for your goodness to a couple of poor, outcast souls.
There was the dip of an oar. Another. Then the voice came again, and for the last time, sounding through the slight surrounding mist, ghostly and mournful.
God bless you. Goodbye.
Goodbye! We shouted together, hoarsely, our hearts full of many emotions. I glanced about me. I became aware that the dawn was upon us. The sun flung a stray beam across the hidden sea, pierced the mist dully, and lit up the receding boat with a gloomy fire. Indistinctly I saw something nodding between the oars. I thought of a sponge, a great grey nodding sponge. The oars continued to ply. They were grey, as was the boat, and my eyes searched a moment vainly for the conjunction of hand and oar. My gaze flashed back to the head. It nodded forward as the oars went backward to the shore. Backward for the stroke, sorry. It nodded forward as the oars went backward for the stroke. Then the oars were dipped, the boat shot out of the patch of light, and the thing went nodding into the mist. And that was The Voice in the Night from 1907 by William Hope Hodgson. So, I don't know how many of you know of Toho Co.'s extended film library, Toho being the company that famously made Godzilla. But they have a movie, I'm pretty sure it's by Toho and not Daiei. I'm pretty sure it's Toho, called Matango, which is literally that story brought to film. Um, I did not know that until we were reading the story, of course. Uh, and I highly recommend the book, the movie. I also recommend the book. I highly recommend the movie. It's quite fun. A great horror flick. Oh man, that was cool. That was spooky. Also, kind of reminds me distinctly of it's this series of books by Jeff Vandermeer called Ambergris, which is spelled like the stuff you find in a whale, ambergris, um, which has as a recurring theme a race called the Gray Caps, which are basically mushroom people um, who live underground and also above ground and also do all sorts of other things. Don't want to spoil too much on that because I do actually plan on reading that series on stream because it's quite fun. Oh, thanks for tuning in, Optical Antenna. The Night Land. That is not a familiar title. If you recommend it, I will check it out. The Night Land. Do, 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 do. By Ballantine. Yeah, I'd also compare it probably to H.P. Lovecraft. This kind of had similar pacing and thematics in terms of fear and a creeping horror. Uh, oh, wow, that sounds like fun. I'm gonna have to get a copy of that. Definitely gonna have to get a hold of that. That sounds a lot of fun. I'll check that one out. Thank you for the recommendation. Okay, what time is it? Mm, oh man, Doing that voice the entire time really shattered my throat. um, how long is this Arthur Conan Doyle one? It's not too bad. We'll do this one by Arthur Conan Doyle, and we'll save The Machine Stops for next week. Right now, I don't have a plan for what I'm doing for Wednesdays, so I guess I'll read through this short story collection for the next couple weeks, and then let me scooch. Yeah, that's right there. Okay. And then I guess I might use it to pick up the slack for the three body problem to make that go quicker. And I'll probably wind up doing something like that for some of the other ones just to speed those up because it's 7 books. Yeah, 6 books. Sorry, 6 books. Unless I decide to read uh, what is it called? It's kind of sort of a prequel to Three Body Problem, but it's got, except for like a line right at the very end, it's got no actual tangible relevant connection. Um, called Ball Lightning, but it's theoretically, I believe, set in the same universe and was written before the Three Body Problem. Uh, so that's one I might wind up doing, but I probably won't because it's not necessary. I mean, strictly speaking, you could make the argument that Destination Void wasn't necessary for the Pandora sequence, but outside of the entire setup of there is a ship and it transports people to a place and suddenly becomes God. Sorry, spoilers if you haven't read that. Listen to that. You should get to it. Um. So yeah, we'll do this Arthur Conan Doyle one, which was published in what 1913, I think. 1913. We got it right. Excellent. So we'll do that, and then we will call it a day. Let's see if I can prop my feet up on something without knocking everything else over. Things are a bit of a mess now that I'm back and haven't had a chance to. I've actually had ample chances to clean up, but I haven't because I'm a lazy bum. We'll get to it. Okay. The Horror of the Heights from 1913 by Arthur Conan Doyle. The idea that the extraordinary narrative which has been called the Joyce Armstrong fragment is an elaborate practical joke, evolved by some person, cursed by a perverted and sinister sense of humor, has now been abandoned by all who have examined the matter. The most macabre and imaginative of plotters would hesitate before linking his morbid fancies with the unquestioned and tragic facts which reinforce the statement. Though the assertions contained in it are amazing and even monstrous, it is none the less forcing itself upon the general intelligence that they are true, and that we must readjust our ideas to the new situation. This world of ours appears to be separated by a slight and precarious margin of safety from a most singular and unexpected danger. I will endeavor in this narrative, which reproduces the original document in its necessarily somewhat fragmentary form, to lay before the reader the whole of the facts up to date, prefacing my statement by saying that, if there be any who doubt the narrative of Joyce Armstrong, there can be no question at all as to the facts concerning Lieutenant Myrtle, R.N., and Mr. Hay Connor, who undoubtedly met their end in the manner described. The Joyce Armstrong fragment was found in the field which is called Lower Haycock, lying 1 mile to the westward of the village of Withyham, upon the Kent and Sussex border. It was on the 15th September that an agricultural labourer, James Flynn, in the employment of Matthew Dodd, farmer, of the Chauntry Farm, Withyham, perceived a briar pipe lying near the footpath which skirts the hedge in Lower Haycock. A few paces farther on, he picked up a pair of broken binocular glasses. Finally, among some nettles in the ditch, he caught sight of a flat, canvas-backed book, which proved to be a notebook with detachable leaves, some of which had come loose and were fluttering along the base of the hedge. These he collected, but some, including the first, were never recovered, and leave a deplorable hiatus in this all-important statement. The notebook was taken by the laborer to his master, who in turn showed it to Dr. J. H. Atherton of Hartfield. This gentleman at once recognized the need for an expert examination, and the manuscript was forwarded to the Aero Club in London, where it now lies. The first 2 pages of the manuscript are missing. There is also one torn away at the end of the narrative, although none of these affect the general coherence of the story. It is conjectured that the missing opening is concerned with the record of Mr. Joyce Armstrong's qualifications as an aeronaut, which can be gathered from other sources, and are admitted to be unsurpassed among the air pilots of England. For many years he has been looked upon as among the most daring and the most intellectual of flying men, a combination which has enabled him to both invent and test several new devices, including the common gyroscopic attachment which is known by his name. The main body of the manuscript is written neatly in ink, but the last few lines are in pencil, and are so ragged as to be hardly legible. Exactly, in fact, as they might be expected to appear as if they were Exactly, in fact, as they might be expected to appear if they were scribbled off hurriedly from the seat of a moving aeroplane. There are, it may be added, several stains, both on the last page and on the outside cover, which have been pronounced by the Home Office experts to be blood, probably human and certainly mammalian. The fact that something closely resembling the organism of malaria was discovered in this blood, and that Joyce Armstrong is known to have suffered from intermittent fever, is a remarkable example of the new weapons which modern science has placed in the hands of our detectives. And now a word as to the personality of the author of this epoch-making statement. Joyce Armstrong, according to the few friends who really knew something of the man, was a poet and a dreamer, as well as a mechanic and an inventor. He was a man of considerable wealth, much of which he had spent in the pursuit of his aeronautical hobby. He had 4 private aeroplanes in his hangars near Devizes, and is said to have made no fewer than 170 ascents in the course of last year. That's 170. He was a retiring man with dark moods, in which he would avoid the society of his fellows. Captain Dangerfield, who knew him better than anyone, says that there were times when his eccentricity threatened to develop into something more serious. His habit of carrying a shotgun with him in his aeroplane was one manifestation of it. Another was the morbid effect which the fall of Lieutenant Myrtle had upon his mind. Myrtle, who was attempting the height record, fell from an altitude of something over 30,000 feet. Horrible to narrate, his head was entirely obliterated, though his body and limbs preserved their configuration. At every gathering of airmen, Joyce Armstrong, according to Dangerfield, would ask, with an enigmatic smile, "And where, pray, is Myrtle's head?" On another occasion, after dinner, at the mess of the flying school on Salisbury Plain, he started a debate as to what will be the most permanent danger which airmen will have to encounter. Having listened to successive opinions as to air pockets, faulty construction, and over-banking, he ended by shrugging his shoulders and refusing to put forward his own views, though he gave the impression that they differed from any advanced by his companions. It is worth remarking that after his own complete disappearance, it was found that his private affairs were arranged with a precision which may show that he had a strong premonition of disaster. With these essential explanations, I will now give the narrative exactly as it stands, beginning at page 3 of the blood-soaked notebook. Give me a sec here. Oh man, I think that was actually 3 pages in. That's clever. Nevertheless, when I dined at Rheims with Coselli and Gustave Raymond, I found that neither of them was aware of any particular danger in the higher layers of the atmosphere. I did not actually say what was in my thoughts, but I got so near to it that if they had any corresponding idea they could not have failed to express it. But then they are two empty, vainglorious fellows with no thought beyond seeing their silly names in the newspaper. Oh gosh, I'm skipping lines everywhere. It is interesting to note that neither of them had ever been much beyond the 20,000-foot level. Of course, men have been higher than this, both in balloons and in the ascent of mountains. It must be well above that point that the aeroplane enters the danger zone, always presuming that my premonitions are correct. Aeroplaning has been with us now for more than 20 years, and one might well ask, why should this peril be only revealing itself in our day? The answer is obvious. In the old days of weak engines, when 100 horsepower gnome or green was considered ample for every need, the flights were very restricted. Now that 300 horsepower is the rule rather than the exception, visits to the upper layers have become easier and more common. Some of us can remember how, in our youth, Garros made a world-wide reputation by attaining 19,000 feet, and it was considered a remarkable achievement to fly over the Alps. Our standard now has been immeasurably raised, and there are 20 high flights for one in former years. Many of them have been undertaken with impunity. The 30,000-foot level has been reached time after time, with no discomfort beyond cold and asthma. What does this prove? A visitor might descend upon this planet 1,000 times and never see a tiger. Yet tigers exist, and if he chanced to come down into a jungle, he might be devoured. There are jungles of the upper air, and there are worse things than tigers which inhabit them. I believe in time they will map these jungles accurately out. Even at the present moment, I could name two of them. One of them lies over the Biarritz. One of them lies over the Pau-Biarritz district of France. Another is just over my head as I write here in my house in Wiltshire. I rather think there is a third in the Homburg-Wiesbaden district. It was the disappearance of the airmen that first set me thinking. Of course, everyone said that they had fallen into the sea, but that did not satisfy me at all. First, there was Verrier in France. His machine was found near Bayonne, but they never got his body. There was the case of Baxter also, who vanished, though his engine and some of the iron fixings were found in a wood in Leicestershire. In that case, Dr. Middleton of Amesbury, who is watching the flight with a telescope, declares that just before the clouds obscured the view, he saw the machine, which was at an enormous height, suddenly rise perpendicularly upwards in a succession of jerks, in a manner that he would have thought to be impossible. That was the last seen of Baxter. There was a correspondence in the papers, but it never led to anything. There were several other similar cases, and then there was the death of Hay Connor. What a cackle there was about an unsolved mystery of the air, and what columns in the halfpenny papers, and yet how little was ever done to get to the bottom of the business. He came down in a tremendous vol plane from an unknown height. He never got off his machine, and died in his pilot's seat. Died of what? Heart disease, said the doctors. Rubbish! Hay Connor's heart was as sound as mine is. What did Venables say? Venables was the only man who was at his side when he died. He said that he was shivering, and looked like a man who had been badly scared. Died of fright, said Venables, but could not imagine what he was frightened about. Only said one word to Venables, which sounded like monstrous. They could make nothing of that at the inquest. But I could make something of it. Monsters. That was the last word of poor Harry Hay Connor. And he did die of fright, just as Venables thought. And then there was Myrtle's head. Do you really believe, does anybody really believe, that a man's head could be driven clean into his body by the force of a fall? Well, perhaps it may be possible, but I, for one, have never believed that it was so with Myrtle. And the grease upon his clothes, all slimy with grease, said somebody at the inquest. Queer that nobody got thinking after that. I did. But then I had been thinking for a good long time. I've made 3 ascents. How Dangerfield used to chaff me about my shotgun. But I've never been high enough. Now, with this new light Paul Verona machine and its 175 Rober, I should easily touch the 30,000 tomorrow. I'll have a shot at the record. Maybe I shall have a shot at something else as well. Of course, it's dangerous. If a fellow wants to avoid danger, he had best keep out of flying altogether, and subside finally into flannel slippers and a dressing gown. But I'll visit the air jungle tomorrow, and if there's anything there, I shall know it. If I return, I'll find myself a bit of a celebrity. If I don't, this notebook may explain what I am trying to do, and how I lost my life in doing it. But no drivel about accidents or mysteries, if you please. I chose... Bah. Bah. I chose my Paul Verona monoplane for the job. There's nothing like a monoplane when real work is to be done. Beaumont found that out in the very early days. For one thing, it doesn't mind damp, and the weather looks as if we should be in the clouds all the time. It's a bonny little model, and answers my hand like a tender-mouthed horse. The engine is a 10-cylinder rotary Rober, working up to 175. It has all the modern improvements: enclosed fuselage, high curved landing skids, brakes, gyroscopic steadiers, and 3 speeds, worked by an alteration of the angle of the planes upon the Venetian blind principle. I took a shotgun with me, and a dozen cartridges filled with buckshot. You should have seen the face of Perkins, my old mechanic, when I directed him to put them in. I was dressed like an Arctic explorer, with 2 jerseys under my overalls, thick socks inside my padded boots, a storm cap with flaps, and my talc goggles. It was stifling outside the hangars, but I was going for the summit of the Himalayas, and had to dress for the part. Perkins knew that there was something on, and implored me to take him with me. Perhaps I should if I were using the biplane, but a monoplane is a one-man show. If you want to get the last foot of life out of it. If you want to get the last foot of life out of it. There we go. Of course, I took an oxygen bag. A man who goes for the altitude record without one will either be frozen or smothered. Or both. I had a good look at the planes, the rudder bar, the elevating lever, before I got in. Everything was in order so far as I could see. Then I switched on my engine and found that she was running sweetly. When they let her go, she rose almost at once upon the lowest speed. I circled my home field once or twice, just to warm her up, and then, with a wave to Perkins and the others, I flattened out my planes and put her on her highest. She skimmed like a swallow downwind for 8 or 10 miles, until I turned her nose up a little, and she began to climb in a great spiral for the cloud bank above me. It's all important to rise slowly, and adapt yourself to the pressure as you go. It was a close, warm day for an English September, and there was the hush and heaviness of impending rain. Now and then there came sudden puffs of wind from the southwest, one of them so gusty and unexpected that it caught me napping, and turned me half round for an instant. I remember the time when gusts and whirls and air pockets used to be things of danger, before we learned to put an overmastering power into our engines. Just as I reached the cloud banks, with the altimeter marking 3,000, down came the rain. My word, how it poured! It drummed upon my wings and lashed against my face, blurring my glasses so that I could hardly see. I got down on to a low speed, for it was painful to travel against it. As I got higher, it became hail, and I had to turn tail to it. One of my cylinders was out of action. A dirty plug, I should imagine, but I was still rising steadily, with plenty of power. After a bit the trouble passed, whatever it was, and I heard the full, deep-throated purr.
the 10 singing as one. That's where the beauty of our modern silencers comes in. We can at last control our engines by ear. How they squeal and squeak and sob when they are in trouble! All those cries for help were wasted in the old days, when every sound was swallowed up by the monstrous racket of the machine. If only the early aviators could come back to see the beauty and perfection of the mechanism which has been bought at the cost of their lives. About 9:30 I was nearing the clouds. Down below me, all blurred and shadowed with rain, lay the vast expanse of Salisbury Plain. Half a dozen flying machines were doing hack work at the 1,000-foot level, looking like little black swallows against the green background. I dare say they were wondering what I was doing up in cloudland. Suddenly a grey curtain drew across beneath me, and the wet folds of vapours were swirling round my face. It was clammily cold and miserable, but I was above the hailstorm, and that was something gained. The cloud was dark. The cloud was as dark and thick as a London fog. In my anxiety to get clear, I cocked her nose up until the automatic alarm bell rang, and I actually began to slide backwards. My sopped and dripping wings had made me heavier than I thought, but presently I was in lighter cloud, and soon had cleared the first layer. There was a second, opal-coloured and fleecy, at a great height above my head, a white, unbroken ceiling above, and a dark, unbroken floor below, with the monoplane labouring upwards upon a vast spiral between them. It is deadly lonely in these cloud spaces. Once a great flight of some small water-birds went past me, flying very fast to the westwards. The quick whir of their wings and their musical cry were cheery to my ear. I fancy that they were teal, but I am a wretched zoologist. Now that we humans have become birds, we must really learn to know our brethren by sight. The wind down beneath me whirled and swayed the broad cloud plain. Once a great eddy formed in it, a whirlpool of vapour, and through it, as down a funnel, I caught sight of the distant world. A large white biplane was passing at a vast depth beneath me. I fancy it was the morning mail service betwixt Bristol and London. Then the drift swirled inwards again, and the great solitude was unbroken. Just after 10 I touched the lower edge of the upper cloud stratum. It consisted of fine diaphanous vapour drifting swiftly from the westwards. The wind had been rising steadily all this time, and it was now blowing a sharp breeze. 28 an hour by my gauge. Already it was very cold, though my altimeter only marked 9,000. The engines were working beautifully, and we were droning steadily upwards. The cloud bank was thicker than I had expected, but at last it thinned out into a golden mist before me, and then in an instant I had shot out from it, and there was an unclouded sky and a brilliant sun above my head, all blue and gold above, all shining silver below, one vast glimmering plain as far as my eyes could reach. It was a quarter past 10 o'clock, and the barograph needle pointed to 12,800. Up I went, and up, my ears concentrated upon the deep purring of my motor, my eyes busy always with the watch, the revolution indicator, the petrol lever, and the oil pump. No wonder aviators are said to be a fearless race. With so many things to think of, there is no time to trouble about oneself. About this time I noted how unreliable is the compass when above a certain height from Earth. At 15,000 feet mine was pointing east and a bit south. The sun and the wind gave me my true bearings. I had hoped to reach an eternal stillness in these high altitudes, but with every 1,000 feet of ascent the gale grew stronger. My machine groaned and trembled in every joint and rivet as she faced it, and swept away like a sheet of paper when I banked her on the turn, skimming down wind at a greater pace, perhaps, than ever mortal man has moved.
Yet I had always to turn again and tack up in the wind's eye, for it was not merely a height record that I was after. By all my calculations, it was above Little Wiltshire that my air jungle lay, and all my labour might be lost if I struck the outer layers at some farther point. When I reached the 19,000-foot level, which was about midday, the wind was so severe that I looked with some anxiety to the stays of my wings, expecting momentarily to see them snap or slacken. I even cast loose the parachute behind me, and fastened its hook into the ring of my leathern belt, so as to be ready for the worst. Now was the time when a bit of scamped work by the mechanic is paid for by the life of the aeronaut. But she held together bravely. Every cord and strut was humming and vibrating like so many harp strings, but it was glorious to see how, for all the beating and the buffeting, she was still the conqueror of nature and the mistress of the sky. There is surely something divine in man himself that he should rise so superior to the limitations which creation seemed to impose. Rise, too, by such unselfish, heroic devotion to this air conquest, as this air conquest has shown. Talk of human degeneration! When has such a story as this been written in the annals of our race? These were the thoughts in my head as I climbed that monstrous inclined plane, with the wind sometimes beating in my face and sometimes whistling behind my ears, while the cloudland beneath me fell away to such a distance that the folds and hummocks of silver had all smoothed out into one flat, shining plain. But suddenly I had a horrible and unprecedented experience. I have known before what it is to be in what our neighbours have called a tourbillon, tourbillon, but never on such a scale as this. That huge sweeping river of wind of which I have spoken had, as it appears, whirlpools within it, which were as monstrous as itself. Without a moment's warning, I was dragged suddenly into the heart of one. I spun round for a minute or two with such velocity that I almost lost my senses, and then fell suddenly, left wing foremost, down the vacuum funnel in the centre. I dropped like a stone, and lost nearly 1,000 feet. It was only my belt that kept me in my seat, and the shock and breathlessness left me hanging, half insensible, over the side of the fuselage. But I am always capable of a supreme effort. It is my one great merit as an aviator. I was conscious that the descent was slower. The whirlpool was a cone rather than a funnel, and I had come to the apex. With a terrific wrench, throwing my weight all to one side, I levelled my planes and brought her head away from the wind. In an instant I had shot out of the eddies and was skimming down the sky. Then, shaken but victorious, I turned her nose up and began once more my steady grind on the upward spiral. I took a large sweep to avoid the danger spot of the whirlpool, and soon I was safely above it. Just after 1 o'clock I was 21,000 feet above the sea level. To my great joy I had topped the gale, and with every 100 feet of ascent the air grew stiller. Stiller. Blech. I'm not enunciating very well. To my great joy I had topped the gale, and with every 100 feet of ascent the air grew stiller. On the other hand, it was very cold, and I was conscious of that peculiar nausea which goes with rarefaction of the air. For the first time I unscrewed the mouth of my oxygen bag, and took an occasional whiff of the glorious gas. I could feel it running like a cordial through my veins, and I was exhilarated almost to the point of drunkenness. I shouted and sang as I soared upwards into the cold, still outer world. It is very clear to me that the insensibility which came upon Glacier? Glacier? Glaisher? I'm not big into early era aeronautics, so I'm not really sure. Glacier? It is very clear to me that the insensibility which came upon Gleicher, and in a lesser degree upon Coxwell, when, in 1862, they ascended in a balloon to the height of 30,000 feet, was due to the extreme speed with which a perpendicular ascent is made. Doing it at an easy gradient and accustoming oneself to the lessened barometric pressure by slow degrees, there are no such dreadful symptoms. At the same great height I found Wah! Sorry, I got lost. At the same great height I found that even without my oxygen inhaler I could breathe without undue distress. It was bitterly cold, however, and my thermometer was at 0 Fahrenheit. At 1:30 I was nearly 7 miles above the surface of the earth, and still ascending steadily. I found, however, that the rarefied air was giving markedly less support to my planes, and that my angle of ascent had to be considerably lowered in consequence. It was already clear that even with my light weight and strong engine power there was a point in front of me where I should be held. To make matters worse, one of my sparking plugs was in trouble again, and there was intermittent misfiring in the engine. My heart was heavy with the fear of failure. It was about that time that I had a most extraordinary experience. Something whizzed past me in a trail of smoke, and exploded with a loud hissing sound, sending forth a cloud of steam. For the instant I could not imagine what had happened. Then I remembered that the earth is forever being bombarded by meteor stones, and would be hardly inhabitable, were they not, in nearly every case, turned to vapour in the outer layers of the atmosphere. Here is a new danger for the high-altitude man, for 2 others passed me when I was nearing the 40,000-foot mark. I cannot doubt that at the edge of the earth's envelope the risk would be a very real one. My barograph needle marked 41,300 when I became aware that I could go no further. Physically, the strain was not as yet greater than I could bear, but my machine had reached its limit. The attenuated air gave no firm support to the wings, and the least tilt developed into a slide slip. And the least tilt developed into side slip, while she seemed sluggish on her controls. Possibly, had the engine been at its best, another 1,000 feet might have been within our capacity, but it was still misfiring, and 2 out of the 10 cylinders appeared to be out of action. If I had not already reached the zone for which I was searching, then I should never see it upon this journey. But was it not possible that I had attained it? Soaring in circles like a monstrous hawk upon the 40,000-foot level, I let the monoplane guide herself, and with my Mannheim glass I made a careful observation of my surroundings. The heavens were perfectly clear. There was no indication of those dangers which I had imagined. I have said that I was soaring in circles. It struck me suddenly that I would do well to take a wider sweep and open up a new air tract. If the hunter entered an earth jungle, he would drive through it if he wished to find his game. My reasoning had led me to believe that the air jungle which I had imagined lay somewhere over Wiltshire. This should be to the south and west of me. I took my bearings from the sun, for the compass was hopeless, and no trace of earth was to be seen. Nothing but the distant silver cloud plain. However, I got my direction as best I might, and kept her head straight to the mark. I reckoned that my petrol supply would not last for more than another hour or so, but I could afford to use it to the last drop, since a single magnificent vol plane could at any time take me to the earth. Suddenly I was aware of something new. The air in front of me had lost its crystal clearness. Wow. I don't know if it's lack of oxygen to the brain or what. I'm getting too into it. This is a ripping yarn. Suddenly I was aware of something new. The air in front of me had lost its crystal clearness. It was full of long, ragged wisps of something which I can only compare to very fine cigarette smoke. It hung about in wreaths and coils, turning and twisting slowly in the sunlight. As the monoplane shot through it, I was aware of a faint taste of oil upon my lips, and there was a greasy scum upon the woodwork of the machine. Some infinitely fine organic matter appeared to be suspended in the atmosphere. There was no life there. It was inchoate it was inchoate and diffuse, extending for many square acres and then fringing off into the void. No, it was not life. But might it not be the remains of life? Above all, might it not be the food of life, of monstrous life, even as the humble grease of the ocean is the food for the mighty whale? The thought was in my mind when my eyes looked upwards, and I saw the most wonderful vision that ever man has seen. Can I hope to convey it to you even as I saw it myself last Thursday? Conceive a jellyfish, such as sails in our summer seas, bell-shaped and of enormous size, far larger, I should judge, than the dome of St. Paul's. It was of a light pink color, veined with a delicate green, but the whole huge fabric so tenuous that it was but a fairy outline against the dark blue sky. It pulsated with a delicate and regular rhythm. From there depended two long, drooping green tentacles, which swayed slowly backwards and forwards. This gorgeous vision passed gently with noiseless dignity over my head, as light and fragile as a soap bubble, and drifted upon its stately way. I had half turned my monoplane that I might look after this beautiful creature, when, in a moment, I found myself amidst a perfect fleet of them, of all sizes, but none so large as the first. Some were quite small, but the majority about as big as an average balloon, and with much the same curvature at the top. There was in them a delicacy of texture and colouring which reminded me of the finest Venetian glass. Pale shades of pink and green were the prevailing tints, but all had a lovely iridescence where the sun shimmered through their dainty forms. Some hundreds of them drifted past me, a wonderful fairy squadron of strange argosies of the sky. Creatures whose forms and substance were so attuned to these pure heights that one could not conceive anything so delicate within actual sight or sound of earth. But soon my attention was drawn to a new phenomenon, the serpents of the outer air. These were long, thin, fantastic coils of vapour-like material, which turned and twisted with great speed, flying round and round at such a pace that the eyes could hardly follow them. Some of these ghost-like creatures were 20 or 30 feet long, but it was difficult to tell their girth, for their outline was so hazy that it seemed to fade away into the air around them. These air snakes were of a very light grey or smoke colour, with some darker lines within, which gave the impression of a definite organism. One of them whisked past my very face, and I was conscious of a cold, clammy contact, but their composition was so unsubstantial that I could not connect them with any thought of physical danger, and oh, okay. One of them whisked past my very face, and I was conscious of a cold, clammy contact, but their composition was so unsubstantial that I could not connect them with any thought of physical danger, any more than the beautiful bell-like creatures which had preceded them. There was no more solidity in their frames than in the floating spume from a broken wave. But a more terrible experience was in store for me. Floating downwards from a great height there came a purplish patch of vapour, small as I saw it first, but rapidly enlarging as it approached me, until it appeared to be hundreds of square feet in size. Though fashioned of some transparent, jelly-like substance, it was none the less much more definite outline and solid consistence than anything which I had seen before. There were more traces, too, of a physical organization, especially two vast, shadowy, circular plates upon either side, which may have been eyes, and a perfectly solid white projection between them, which was as curved and cruel as the beak of a vulture. The whole aspect of this monster was formidable and threatening, and it kept changing its color from a very light mauve to a dark, angry purple so thick that it cast a shadow as it drifted between my monoplane and the sun. On the upper curves of its huge body were three great projections which I can only describe as enormous bubbles, and I was convinced, as I looked at them, that they were charged with some extremely light gas which served to buoy up the misshapen and semi-solid mass in the rarefied air. The creature moved swiftly along, keeping pace easily with the monoplane, and for 20 miles or more it formed my horrible escort, hovering over me like a bird of prey which is waiting to pounce. Its method of progression, done so swiftly that it was not easy to follow, was to throw out a long glutinous streamer in front of it, which in turn seemed to draw forward the rest of the writhing body. So elastic and gelatinous was it that never for two successive minutes sorry. So elastic and glutinous was it that never for 2 successive minutes was it the same shape, and yet each change made it more threatening and loathsome than the last. I knew that it meant mischief. Every purple flush of its hideous body told me so. The vague, goggling eyes which were turned always upon me were cold and merciless in their viscid hatred. I dipped the nose of my monoplane downwards to escape it. As I did so, as quick as a flash, there shot out a long tentacle from this mass of floating blubber, and it fell as light and sinuous as a whiplash across the front of my machine. There was a loud hiss as it lay for a moment across the hot engine, and it whisked itself into the air again, while the huge flat body drew itself together as if in sudden pain. I dipped to a vol pique, but again the tentacle fell over the monoplane and was shorn off by the propeller as easily as it might have cut through a smoke wreath. A long, gliding, sticky, serpent-like coil came from behind and caught me round the waist, dragging me out of the fuselage. I tore at it, my fingers sinking into the smooth, glue-like surface, and for an instant I disengaged myself, but only to be caught round the boot by another coil, which gave me a jerk that tilted me almost onto my back. As I fell over, I blazed off both barrels of my gun, though, indeed, it was like attacking an elephant with a pea-shooter to imagine that any human weapon could cripple that mighty bulk. And yet I aimed better than I knew, for, with a loud report, one of the great blisters upon the creature's back exploded with the puncture of the buckshot. It was very clear that my conjecture was right, and that these vast clear bladders were distended with some lifting gas, for in an instant the huge cloud-like body turned sideways, writhing desperately to find its balance, while the white beak snapped and gaped in horrible fury. But already I had shot away on the steepest glide that I dared to attempt, my engine still full on, the flying propeller and the force of gravity shooting me downwards like an aerolite. Far behind me I saw a dull purplish smudge growing swiftly smaller and merging into the blue sky behind it. I was safe out of the deadly jungle of the outer air. Once out of danger, I throttled my engine, for nothing tears a machine to pieces quicker than running on full power from a height. It was a glorious spiral vol plane from nearly 8 miles of altitude, first to the level of the silver cloud bank, then to that of the storm cloud beneath it, and, finally, in beating rain, to the surface of the earth. I saw the Bristol Channel beneath me as I broke from the clouds, but, having still some petrol in my tank, I got 20 miles inland before I found myself stranded in a field half a mile from the village of Ashcombe. There I got 3 tins of petrol from a passing motor car, and at 10 minutes past 6 that evening I alighted gently in my own home meadow at Devizes. After such a journey as no mortal upon earth has ever yet taken, and lived to tell the tale. I have seen the beauty, and I have seen the horror of the heights, and greater beauty or greater horror than that is not within the ken of man. And now it is my plan to go once again before I give my results to the world. My reasons for this My reason singular, sorry. My reason for this is that I must surely have something to show by way of proof before I lay such a tale before my fellow men. It is true that others will soon follow, and will confirm what I have said, and yet I should wish to carry conviction from the first. Those lovely iridescent bubbles of the air should not be hard to capture. They drift slowly upon their way, and the swift monoplane could intercept their leisurely course. It is likely enough that they would dissolve in the heavier layers of the atmosphere, and that some small heap of amorphous jelly might be all that I should bring to earth with me. And yet something there would surely be. And yet something there would surely be by which I could substantiate my story. Yes, I will go, even if I run a risk by doing so. These purple horrors would not seem to be numerous. It is probable that I shall not see one. If I do, I shall dive at once. At the worst, there is always the shotgun, and my knowledge of— Here a page of the manuscript is unfortunately missing. On the next page is written, in large straggling writing, 40,000 feet. I shall never see earth again. They are beneath me, 3 of them. God help me! It is a dreadful death to die. Such in its entirety is the Joyce Armstrong statement. Of the man nothing has since been seen. Pieces of his shattered monoplane have been picked up in the preserves of Mr. Bud Lushington, upon the borders of Kent and Sussex, within a few miles of the spot where the notebook was discovered. If the unfortunate aviator's theory is correct, that this air jungle, as he called it, existed over the southwest of England, then it would seem that he had fled from it at the full speed of his monoplane, but had been overtaken and devoured by these horrible creatures at some spot in the outer atmosphere above the place where the grim relics were found. The picture of that monoplane skimming down the sky, with the nameless terrors flying as swiftly beneath it and cutting it off always from the earth, while they gradually closed in upon their victim, is one upon which a man who valued his sanity would prefer not to dwell. There are many, as I am aware, who still jeer at the facts which I have here set down, but even they must admit that Joyce Armstrong has disappeared, and I would commend to them his own words. This notebook may explain what I am trying to do, and how I lost my life in doing it. But no drivel about accidents or mysteries, if you please. And that was The Horror of the Heights, written in 1913 by Arthur Conan Doyle. That was a cute one. I liked that. Oh, we have more words. Let's see. Oh, thank you for tuning in, Brandon CWW. Have to listen to this from the start, but excited to hear some early sci-fi. Blue Shell Phobia, tuning in via Twitch, says, just discovered your channel via YouTube, listening to the Southern Reach trilogy. I drive long distances, and having audiobooks to listen to keeps me awake, safe and sane, so thanks for what you're doing. Thank you for tuning in. Glad you enjoy. In class right now, so I'll have to, Kiri says, in class right now, so I'll have to listen to this later on. Glad to see you. Hope you are doing well. Greetings from Germany. Greetings to you too. Jawohl. So yeah, that'll do it for today. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. Got some new faces, or at least under new names. Yeah, we're back. We are very, very much back. So yeah, this Friday we will start The Three-Body Problem by Xijin Liu. And so the next couple weeks will be Armor, followed by short stories from this. Oh, don't drop that. That's important. And The Three-Body Problem. So that'll be the foreseeable future. After Armor, I'm going to do All You Need Is Kill by Sakurazawa, I think his name is. I can't remember off the top of my head. I don't know why I have a mental block. And after the Three-Body Problem, the Three-Body problem. We will do The Jesus Incident by Brian Herbert. No, sorry, Jesus. Frank Herbert. Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom, which make quite a dynamic duo. I've grown to rather enjoy, because I've been rereading it, I've grown to be rather pleased with the Pandora sequence. I had read through it before, um, and enjoyed it, but really reading through it, it's very there's some great ideas in there. So yeah, I will see you all later. As ever. Oh, to anyone wondering why this was so rough. So first of all, I'm sight reading these. These ones I am sight reading from this short story collection. Usually I have read something that I'm doing on stream before. This time we did not. So you'll notice voices change either abruptly, subtly, or they just do as I get kind of into the swing of the tale. I try to be better prepped, but that was not possible this time. So performance art it continues to be, and on that performance art note, the other reason these are so rough is because I do these live in front of whoever will listen. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, starting at 12 noon U.S. East Coast time, Eastern Standard Time, UTC -5. Um, so if you want to catch me live, you can. Otherwise, feel free to check these out. They're all archived on the YouTube, with the exception of Echopraxia, which I had to take down because the first one got dinged by a copyright strike. So that's no longer there. When I get something like a Discord channel or something up and running, I can provide links to all of that so people can listen to it. Oh, here we go. I'm about halfway through Destination Void and loving all the asides about today's AI landscape. Would you ever consider doing Mary Shelley's Frankenstein? It's probably too long for a Halloween read. I would happily do Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, in fact. I do have a copy. I think it is right there. I think I'm looking in its general direction. It might be hidden behind something. So yes, I could do that. I'll probably do that on Wednesdays. Uh, Around the time. I might start like the week before. We'll see. We'll see what's going on. But yes, I will happily do that one. Let me put that into the grand old document. I have a master document that I'm using in order to keep track of what I've committed to do because I take suggestions or requests rather. No, that's the wrong. There we go. There it is. Okay, let's get um, Frankenstein. Shelley. Let's see. We're getting to Destination Void. We're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that. What was the other one? I'll get Forever War and Nightland. The Forever War by Haldeman and The Nightland by Hodgson. I'm going to have to actually get a copy of that, but I will get a copy of that. Okay. So yeah, anytime anyone has a request, feel free to hit me up. I can't promise that I'll get to it anytime soon because we're already because I do silly things like be like, hey, you know what would be a cool idea? Trading between the 6 books of 2 trilogies. You know, this is the second time I've done it, and it just eats a ton of time. So like just like because I'm not doing it every day, and I have my streams split up between different thematic stuff. Wednesday I have right now is a float day where I'll do whatever. Fridays I'm going to keep generally. I don't really have a specific theme for free read Fridays. Um, I guess theoretically it's It's science fiction themed, but it doesn't have to be. Mondays for now will remain Mecha Mondays, where I'll do some Mecha related or adjacent literature, because there's quite a lot I can throw under that aegis. I haven't even touched the innumerable BattleTech novels that have been written over the years. Um, so many, so many. Um, I have but a drop in the bucket. So there's a surprisingly large amount of stuff that can fit under that. Power armor counts. If for some reason I decide to read Warhammer 40k stuff, uh, that would be where it would go. I would probably not, though, even though I have a fair collection. Um, actually, it is fair in that I have a number of the stuff that was published before they started publishing the Horus Heresy stuff. And at that point, I was just like, no, I'm sorry, I don't care enough. Used to be really into the hobby, and then, Nazis started getting really loud and vocal, and I was like, I gotta kind of shy away. Fortunately, there's been pushback on that front by Games Workshop themselves, but you've got a problem when you have to release an actual notice saying letter to the community saying, hey, by the way, we've noticed there's a bunch of people who haven't twigged to the fact that the Imperium of Man are not the good guys. They're the bad guys. And anytime that you're thinking they're doing a good thing, they're not. Um, why can't you catch on to that, please? Please, please, please. Don't be a horrible Nazi for 5 minutes. Thank you. Uh, so, so there's that. Anyway, uh, where was I? Right. So as always, stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. And I will see you next time. Until next time, goodbye. Toodles.